Welcome to Introduction to Game Development. This is Computer Science 303 at Missouri State University. My name is Matthew and I'll be showing you how to use UDK. And as always, I will preface this video with the disclaimer that I am not an expert. Now today we'll be working with the terrain editor. Now I'll go ahead and start opening my UDK editor now. The terrain editor, it allows us to work with dynamically deformable base height maps extended by multiple layers of smoothly blended materials. Then layer on procedural weathering such as grass and vegetations or snow on mountain peaks or whatever you like really. Which basically means that we're going to be painting a terrain with different heights and then painting it with grass or dirt or rock or whatever we can find in terms of materials from our content browser. And so today we're going to go ahead and begin with a fresh map. So it went ahead and created a new map for us as I opened here, so I'll go ahead and close that. And in a future lesson we'll learn how to incorporate this new map that we're creating with the one we've already started in the previous labs. It's possible that these terrain features that we're going to be working on might slow down your system quite a bit, particularly if you use lots of foliage, which is basically where we can paint static meshes in groups across the terrain. And so it's nice to work on these features in isolation from the rest of the level that you're building. Now for the final build of your game as it would be released though, there's a continuous LOD system that transitions seamlessly while moving through the terrain without any sudden popping. And there's a high resolution data is streamed in and out of memory, so data is always loaded at the resolution you need. Very distant regions of terrain remain visible and rendered with the highest quality lighting and materials while occupying only the minimal amount of memory. And despite some hints that they are working on using terrain on mobile platforms like the iPad, terrain is currently unsupported on mobile platforms, and so whenever you build you'll also get a warning saying, warning not supported on mobile platforms. But there is a workaround though, in that you can create the terrain in UDK like we're going to do today, and then you can export the terrain as an object and load it up in 3ds Max or Maya or Blender or whatever program you like to use, and tweak it however you like, and then import it back as a single static mesh. And so we'll go ahead and start by going to Tools and choose New Terrain. And as you can see here, there's a location and patches in our New Terrain wizard here. But we'll go ahead and leave all of these default values for 0, 0, 0, and our patches will do 16 by 16. Select Next, and now we have a layer setup here, but we don't have any layers built from previous maps yet, so let's go ahead and just choose Finish. And right away we can see that there's this platform here, perfectly flat with a number of vertices across it. And if we go to unlit mode, we can see it's covered in the default texture. Now if you're not seeing anything right now, it's quite well possible that you might have accidentally toggled off in your viewport whether or not you can see terrain. If you just press the T key, it'll turn terrain on or off in your viewport. And so if you're working on some other features in your level while you have terrain in there as well, and it's maybe not performing as well as you would like, just pressing T will toggle off that terrain and make it a little bit easier to work. And that might happen to you often, especially if you use the Control T click to teleport around whenever you're in the editor, where you might accidentally press T without realizing it. And so if your terrain disappears suddenly, then just go ahead and press that hotkey and it should pop right back up. And if we go back to wireframe mode here, you can see there's a number of vertices here, but as well you could go ahead and if you click this button right here, it's the second from the top on the first column in the Modes section of your UI. You can see also there's a hotkey there, it's Shift 3. Shift 3 will open your terrain editor. And right away I want to go ahead and show you, there's this section down here called Tessellation, where you can increase or decrease the number of vertices you have on your terrain. And so I would not recommend increasing it too much though, because performance can quickly get out of hand if you're adding way too many vertices. I'll go ahead and keep it at the default values here for terrain while we're doing the video here. I still struggle quite a bit to perform well while creating this video here, but we'll do our best here. And so you'll notice it doesn't have anything selected down here. Normally there would be rows of different layers, but since we haven't added anything to our terrain yet, there's only one layer, and that's the height map itself. So we want to make sure that's selected, and it has a yellow highlighting. And it may be selected for you already, but the button we want to use up here in this Tools section is the middle one on the top here, which is for being able to paint whatever kind of feature that we're working on. And as long as we have the height map selected and this Paint Tool button selected, then we can choose different brushes. And you'll notice here, whenever I have the mouse over the terrain, that there's basically red circles creating a reticle. If we choose different brushes over here, though, the size of the reticle changes. So the reticle is essentially your brush that you're going to be working on these vertices with. And for each of these brushes we might choose, you'll notice the strength, radius, and fall off will all change. If you mouse over them, it'll show the exact values, but as well you can see them on these sliders up here. And we can adjust these sliders directly as well to create our own custom brushes. Like for instance, maybe we don't want the strength to be 100, so we can bring it down a little bit. It'll only move the terrain half the speed that it normally would. And so now as we have this selected here, and we have our reticle over one of these vertices, hold the Control key and left click to move the terrain upward at that point. And my system's a little touchy here, where it's showing it only in halting moments, but as you can see there, we just raised the vertex that we had selected, or that we were moused over with our brush. And as well, we can go ahead and hold Control and use the right mouse key to bring a section of the terrain downward. So we have this area here that we increased in height, and this area here that we decreased in height. Now let's go ahead and also take a look at this in our unlit mode here. And so it's maybe not so easy to see here since we don't really get any shadows with our unlit mode, but if I went to lit mode, you'd see here that we can't actually see anything because we haven't added any lights to the level yet. Now in the past we were using point lights wherever we went by just pressing L and clicking at different locations. This time though, let's go ahead and add a dominant directional light, and this will cover the entire level. And so if we go to right click, add actor, and add light, dominant directional light. So now we've added it. I'll go ahead and raise it up. It doesn't matter where you locate this though, so it's just anywhere you might put it in level, it will go ahead and have that effect, whatever it might be. And so now let's go to lit mode. Oh, so we're in lit mode now. And so in lit mode now we can kind of see that shadow on the side there, but let's go ahead and press space to get to our rotation here. We can change the angle at which the dominant directional light is intersecting with our terrain here. So we have a little bit of artifacting light here until we build the lighting, I believe. So I'll go ahead and put it on its side there. So now we can see there's a little bit of definition to this terrain that we're building. We still have this default white and blue material though. So let's go ahead and change that. Now we want to be careful here because your first thought whenever you want to add materials to terrain is maybe to treat it like it's some brush that you want to add some material to, but we can't do that with terrain exactly. What we can do though is let's go to our content browser and we'll sort by materials, we'll filter it by materials rather, and now let's search for grass. And so there's a lot of different kinds of grass textures here. And we'll go ahead and choose this M grass plane, and we'll want it to be selected here in our content browser. And now back to our terrain over here, I'll hit Shift 3, and I'll go ahead and pause while I'm waiting for the sirens to finish here for a moment. Okay, sorry about that pause for a moment. And now while we have this grass plane material selected, and we go over here to our terrain editor window, if you right click, you have a number of different options here. The one we want to choose here is New Terrain Setup Layer from Material Auto Create. If you try to create a terrain layer using one of the other options, it'll give you way more info or options than you really need as we begin here. So let's go ahead and just choose it as is. And since we had it selected, it went ahead and imported it right away, and since that was the first layer that we've added, it went ahead and replaced that default material with this new one that's covered in grass. And one moment. Now I want to rebuild the lighting to see if that will improve our artifacted light here on the height map that we've adjusted. So before I actually build the lighting though, I want to go ahead and put in a light mass importance volume. And so if we go to our brush, so here we have our brush. We can tell we have our brush selected down here. And I'll go to our 4 viewports here. So here's our brush. We'll get to a top view. So we can see the edges of our terrain right here. And I will move our brush over to it in the middle. And I will resize it so that it encompasses our entire terrain. And then also, I'll zoom in here a little bit. I'll bring it up a little bit here. And as we can see here, the brush kind of comes right underneath the terrain. And actually, I'll bring it down a little bit in case we bring our terrain down even further in elevation. So, there we go. So this is the whole area now that we want to have in our dominant directional, or in our light mass importance volume. So now we go to volumes, and then light mass importance volume. So we just added it there where our brush was. I'll move the brush so you can see it. There's the little green line there for our light mass importance volume. And I'll go ahead and build all real quick. So that we've built everything here, you can see again we have that warning for kill Z not being set, but we'll go ahead and disregard that for now since we're going to end up streaming this level into another level later. So I'll close that, and you can see now that area that we added, that we increased the elevation and decreased the elevation, now has more proper shading. And if we go back to our editor window, I'll go back to our wireframe mode here. We can go ahead and do some more with our elevation here. Notice the strength is still set pretty low, so if you have it at 100, it might be shooting up or down. And it might not be ideal, but it's not that big a deal when you're just dealing with the elevation. There's other features here, though, that you might want to watch out for. For one, we have this smooth feature in the tools, and if we have our smoothness tool chosen here, then whenever we hit Control and left click, it will try and smooth it to where it's more of an even curve across your vertices. And so maybe if we took the radius to be a little bit larger, we could affect more of these vertices at once. So now I have a much larger brush here. And it just smoothed it down. So it didn't take the elevation, the lowering in elevation away completely, but it did smooth it to be more of a natural curve with that terrain. And in addition to that smoothness tool, we also have a flattening tool where, and I'll choose a smaller brush here, and I may have a little bit of trouble doing this here with the video selected, but you find some vertex that has a different elevation than those surrounding it. Use this larger one. And holding Control and the left click will make it all the exact same elevation. And as you move over multiple vertices here, it's taking just a moment while I'm doing this here. So now I've just made this little area here to be flat with that original vertex that I chose. And I can close this terrain editor and go back into lit mode. And as we can see here, we have a flat top to this little plateau we just created. So we have a little hill that we've made, we have a little depression that we've made and smoothed out, and we also have this little flattened area here that we just created with the flattening tool. And as well, if you wanted to remove a section, then we also have this visibility tool, which I'm not going to use right now because it might slow down the computer too much. And so with those tools of being able to change the tessellation, the height, the smoothness, and the visibility, and also to flatten certain areas, you can pretty much create any kind of terrain you might imagine. And we have this bottom layer here selected to be grass plane, which we imported earlier, but we can also add other kinds of materials here. And so if we go ahead and go to the content browser again, and with materials selected, so last time we looked for grass, this time let's look for dirt. Nothing? Okay, let's say mud? No. Or, let's see here, all assets. There we go. Dirt. There we go. So, I didn't have all assets selected, so make sure you have all assets selected and just search for dirt. And we'll go ahead and select one of these here. So this is Blackrock 02 dirt. And we'll go ahead, and now that it's selected in our content browser, just like last time, we'll right click here and we'll say new terrain setup layer from material. And since we had it selected, it'll come in just as it is. And so now that we have multiple terrains here and also the height map, let's look at how we can also use that paint tool to paint on different materials. And so say for instance we want to make this hill to be more of a dirt mound. So select that new material we just added in here in our terrain editor window. And while we have this paint tool selected, make sure we have a brush also, then we can go ahead and paint that material onto that vertex. And you'll notice it doesn't all come in at once. It's since we're using this diffuse brush here with the fall off set it as it is. And as we hold Control and left click, it's adding that material on top of the other material. And I'll continue painting some more areas here with this dirt we've selected for our material. And try to get this far side of the island as well. You might find that your computer often hangs while you're working with the terrain editor, and I've also found that if UDK is going to crash, it's most likely going to happen when I'm working with the terrain editor. And just like last time, whenever we would control and left click to increase the height and control and right click to lower the height, with our paint tool selected, whenever we have a material as the layer that we're working in, then control left click will add that material, and control right click will remove that material. And essentially the materials are all on this terrain sheet at all times anyway. It's just a question of basically where the alpha is set for different spots, so that maybe it's not visible, but you can make it visible so long as it's within the proper layer that you're working with. That's to say that it does the height map, and then on top of that height map it does the grass planes, and then on top of that it does the rock, and then after that it would do any other further layers that we added to this. But if you wanted to have some lower layer that, in this listing here, to be selected, and also to have the grass plane come up, you might have some difficulty recognizing which layer's on top whenever you're working, if you have a lot of different materials used. So now that you know how to adjust the height map, and to add different material layers, and to use different brushes, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording for a moment while I work on making this terrain a little more pleasant for us. And you can go ahead and do your terrain in the lab however you like. Although I would like you to go ahead and keep the middle of the terrain that we're building to be flat and at its default location. So work around the perimeters of your terrain. So now I've played around with it a little bit. I've used that material in different spots, and I've put little hills and mountains surrounding our entire terrain here. And if we just go to, and I went ahead and built it, so we'll go ahead and right click and play from here. And so right away you can see we've got a nice looking terrain already. And since we're using a dominant directional light set at this angle coming from the side, there's also these shadows which the terrain is projecting as well onto itself, which is rather neat. But besides the fact that we've changed the height map, and we've changed the default material and added another material layer on there, our terrain is otherwise barren. And so now we need to learn how to use foliage to paint static meshes onto our terrain as well. So I'll go ahead and close my window there and go back to our terrain editing mode. And as well, let's go to the content browser. And this time we'll search for static meshes. And let's go ahead and search for tree. Make sure we're in all assets. So here is a collection of different trees, and be careful, some of them don't have collision. But let's go ahead and put let's put this fall tree in here. So if we select this fall tree and we right click, then we choose new deco layer. And we'll just call it new deco layer. Oh, and I made a slight mistake there. We haven't actually added that static mesh to our decoration layer here. So first, let's go ahead and getting that content browser back up here. While we have this selected, right-click the new deco layer and add selected decoration. Now you notice whenever we did that, this little arrow popped up here. And when we click on that arrow, it shows that we have a static mesh component factory 1. And while we have this selected here, let's go ahead and go to Properties in our Terrain Editor window up here in the View Settings section of the UI. And you'll notice in the Terrain section here, if you go down to Deco Layers, and you can choose our new deco layer that we just made, has the name there, and it has the number of different decorations that we have added into it, which right now is just one. And so if we go ahead and go to that here, you can see that there's a minimum scale setting, a max scale setting, density, and a slope rotation blend. And we can change these values for how it might randomly add that static mesh to the terrain. And so let's say we have minimum scale being 0.5, maximum scale being, say, 1.5. Density, it's to say how many of these do we want to be able to appear in a given section of the terrain. So I'll go ahead and say 3. And slope rotation blend, I'm not one to normally change that very much, but if you think your trees are much too similar as you've added them, then you can change that slope rotation blend, and it might have them at different angles and for your differently elevated terrain. And also the random seed here, which you can change, and then as you paint the decoration on that layer, then it will make the static meshes appear in different random spots depending on which seed you have. And so I'll go ahead and close this now, and let's go ahead and add another static mesh as well. So we added a tree. Now let's also add, let's see, is there a grass static mesh? Yes, there is. So we'll go ahead and add a grass clump. So with these grass clumps selected here, we'll say right-click, add selected decoration. So now we have two different static meshes inside this decoration layer. And while we have it selected, I'll go ahead and close my content browser, and we have our brush down here, we can go ahead and add these features just like we were painting a material, or just like we were adjusting the height map. So if we control and left click, and we might not see them right away, it'll just take just a moment. I'll go ahead and make my brush a little bit larger too. So I'll make the radius much larger. Oh, and there we go. So it worked that time. It gave us two different trees in that one spot that I just added the decoration to, and notice they're at different angles and different sizes. Oh, and as well, I forgot we need to adjust that properties for our second decoration we just added. So we'll go to properties again, and notice this time we have that static mesh component factory. 0 was the first one we added for the trees, which we adjusted those values, but we didn't adjust them for the second one for the grasses. So let's go ahead and do the same scaling, 0.5 to 1.5. And then as well we have the density, which we could probably use a lot more of those than the trees, so let's say 6. And we'll not worry about the slope rotation blend or the random seed. Closing that now. And it may well have added some of these grass clumps already. Yep, see, there they are. So it had actually already painted in the densities that it would normally have. It was just a matter of we hadn't actually chosen the values for which it would place that static mesh. So we have these grasses now everywhere. I'll go ahead and close this. Right-click and play from here. And I'll have to rebuild lighting since these static meshes do cast a shadow. But you can see we have little grass clumps here. This one's actually at the base of the tree, and this one's on the edge here. And I did have a little bit of issues, whenever I was using decorations on my terrain in my previous projects, where just the more decorations I added, the less able my computer was able to handle the level, really. And so you might want to be a little judicious in how you use this decoration layer, or any number of decoration layers that you might put on there. But otherwise, you should be able to create just about any kind of terrain you can imagine with it. And so I'll go ahead and rebuild the lighting here real quick. Actually, before I do that, let's go ahead and add a player start here. So add actor, add player start. And you'll notice where it came in there, since our elevation's kind of wonky, On the terrain, I'll go ahead and raise this up a little bit. So there's the player start now. I'll actually bring it over here a little bit so it's more in the flat area. There we go. So it's just off the ground there, so that's where we're going to start in the game now. And something else I wanted to show you as well. Let's go to the content browser. And then under actor classes, on the tab on top here, in the categories, go to vehicles. And we'll go ahead and add a couple vehicles here so we can fly around in our level and take a look at our terrain as the player might see it while riding in a vehicle. And so we have this UT Vehicle Factory Cicada. I'll drop that right there. I'll raise it a little bit off the ground. And also we have this Manta, so I will add that right beside it. And as well we have this Scorpion, and these are 3 default vehicles that you have available to you in UDK. I'll close this now, and I'll go ahead and build all real quick. Okay, so we have our player start, we have our 3 vehicles, and our terrain with its decoration layer. I'll go ahead and play. So here we are in our level again. Just walking up to the vehicle allows us to go right up and start flying in it when we click upon it. And I'll go ahead and escape now, and you guys can go ahead and play around with your terrain a little bit more. If your computer is able to handle it, go ahead and extend. You can create multiple terrain platforms, or you can just simply enlarge this one and have fun.